The first day felt heavier than it should have. The new girl stepped off the school bus with her backpack held close. Not because it was heavy, but because it gave her something to hold on to. The building in front of her looked ordinary, yet the air around it felt tight, like everyone already knew their place and she didn't. She had moved only a week ago, leaving behind a neighborhood where she was known, teachers who smiled at her, and friends who understood her quiet ways. Here, every face was new, and most of them did not bother to hide their curiosity. She walked through the front doors, following the signs to the office. Her shoes echoed softly on the hallway floor. A few students glanced at her, then looked away. Others stared a little too long. She kept her eyes forward, reminding herself that she had handled new places before. She was not weak. She had been raised to stay calm, to observe, and to never let fear control her actions. At the office, paperwork was handed over with polite but distant smiles. Her schedule was printed, her locker number written down quickly, as if the staff had other things to do. Nothing rude was said, yet nothing warm was offered either. She thanked them, turned, and began the walk to her first class. As she moved down the hallway, the noise of students grew louder. Lockers slammed, laughter bounced off the walls, and conversations filled the air. She felt like a visitor in someone else's home. When she reached her classroom, she took an empty seat near the window. She preferred corners. Corners let her watch without being watched too closely. The teacher started the lesson without asking her to introduce herself. That suited her fine. She listened, took notes, and followed along. Still, she could feel eyes on her. Whispers moved from one desk to another. She heard the words new and transfer, and then the tone shifted. The whispers turned sharp, quiet but cutting. She focused harder on her notebook. During the break between classes, she stood to leave and accidentally brushed past another student's desk. It was a small mistake, the kind that usually earned a quick sorry and nothing more. But this time, the chair scraped loudly, and an annoyed voice filled the room. "Watch where you're going." She turned and apologized calmly. Her voice was steady. She meant it, but the apology didn't soften the reaction. Instead, the student leaned back, eyes narrow, looking her up and down as if measuring something. From that moment, attention stuck to her like glue. In the cafeteria later that day, she stood in line with her tray, unsure where to sit. Tables were already filled with groups who clearly knew each other well. She chose a quieter table near the wall and sat alone. As she ate, she noticed someone across the room watching her. Not just a quick glance, but a long look, followed by a smirk. Then came whispers again. Fingers pointed. Laughter followed. She kept eating. She had learned long ago that reacting gave people what they wanted. Silence, patience, and control were her shields. But to the one watching her, silence looked like weakness. By the end of the day, rumors had already begun to form. Some said she was trouble. Others said she thought she was better than everyone else because she kept to herself. A few claimed she had a bad attitude. None of it was true, but truth rarely moved as fast as gossip. The next morning, the attention became sharper. Notes were passed. Glances turned into open stares. When she answered a question in class, someone scoffed. When she walked past a group in the hallway, someone laughed just a bit too loud. No teacher stepped in. It was the kind of behavior that stayed just under the line, easy to ignore, easy to excuse. One student in particular seemed to enjoy pushing that line. This person spoke loudly, moved confidently, and acted as if the school belonged to them. Friends followed, nodding, laughing, backing every comment. Power like that didn't come from kindness. Came from fear and influence. One afternoon, as she opened her locker, her books slipped and fell to the floor. Before she could bend down, a voice cut in. "Careful. Wouldn't want anything to go missing around you." The words were said with a smile, but the meaning was clear. Accusation. Judgment. A few nearby students froze, waiting to see what would happen. She slowly picked up her books and stood up straight. "I didn't take anything," she said calmly. "I didn't say you did," the voice replied. "I'm just saying, things happen." Laughter followed. Not everyone laughed, but enough did. She walked away without another word. Inside, her chest felt tight, but she refused to let it show. That night, she wrote everything down in a small notebook she kept hidden in her bag. Dates, times, words. She had been taught that details mattered. At home, she didn't complain. She didn't want pity. She believed in handling problems with patience first. She focused on her homework, helped with chores, and kept her thoughts to herself. The adults in her life trusted her strength, even if they didn't know yet how much she was being tested. Days passed and the behavior didn't stop. It grew bolder. Accusations were whispered louder. Once, her backpack was searched by a classmate as a joke. Another time, someone claimed money had gone missing right after she walked through the room. Each time, there was no proof. Each time, the suspicion still landed on her. Teachers warned the class about respect, but no names were called. No real action was taken. That silence felt louder than any insult. Still, she stayed composed. She arrived early. She left on time. She followed every rule carefully. She knew that one mistake could be used against her. What she didn't know was that someone had already decided the story they wanted to tell about her, and they were willing to involve anyone to make it sound true. By the end of that first week, the school no longer felt like just a new place. It felt like a test. One she didn't ask for. One she didn't deserve. Yet she stood steady, unaware that the quiet strength she showed would soon be challenged in a way no student should ever face. The second week began with a feeling she could not shake. It wasn't fear exactly, but pressure, like the air was slowly closing in. She noticed it the moment she stepped onto campus. Conversations stopped when she passed. Some students watched her with open curiosity now, not even trying to hide it. Others avoided her completely, as if being near her could cause trouble. She stayed focused on her routine. Locker, class, notes, quiet. That routine gave her balance. But balance was getting harder to keep. In class, small things kept happening. Her chair would be moved when she stood up. Papers went missing, then showed up later crumpled under her desk. Once, a pen rolled off her table, and a voice behind her said, "Careful. Don't say we didn't warn you." It was said softly, but the message was loud. She did not respond. She wrote everything down later just like before. She knew how stories could be twisted when details were missing. During lunch, she tried sitting at a different table, hoping to disappear into the crowd. It didn't work. The same group sat nearby watching. One of them leaned over and spoke loudly enough for others to hear. "Funny how some people think they can come in here and act like nothing applies to them." Someone laughed. Another added, "Yeah, like rules don't matter." She kept her eyes on her food. Her hands were steady, even though her stomach wasn't. She reminded herself that anger would only feed the situation. That afternoon, a teacher asked the class to work in pairs. No one moved toward her. The silence stretched. Finally, she was told to work alone. The teacher smiled politely, but the moment stung. Being ignored hurt more than insults sometimes. After school, she stayed late in the library. It was quiet there, safe. As she packed up to leave, she noticed a folded paper tucked into her book. She opened it slowly. "People are watching you." No signature, no joke, just that sentence. Her chest tightened, but she folded the paper carefully and placed it in her notebook with the rest of her notes. She walked home calmly, though every sound behind her felt louder than it should have. At home, she still said nothing. She believed in giving situations time, but even she could tell this wasn't fading. It was growing. The next day, something small but serious happened. During a group activity, a phone went missing. The room buzzed with confusion. Pockets were checked. Bags were searched. Then a voice spoke up. "Maybe we should check her bag." The room went quiet. All eyes turned toward her. She felt the weight of that moment. One accusation could change everything. She stood slowly and placed her bag on the desk. "Go ahead," she said calmly. "There's nothing in there." The teacher hesitated, then nodded. The bag was opened. Books, papers, pens, nothing else. The phone was later found under a chair on the other side of the room. No apology followed. Just uncomfortable silence. After class, she heard whispers again. She got lucky. Next time won't be the same. That word stuck with her. Next time. By midweek, the tone had shifted. The comments were no longer playful or indirect. They were sharper, more confident. It was clear someone felt protected, backed by something bigger than school rules. One afternoon, as she waited outside a classroom, a figure stepped into her space, close enough that she could smell the strong scent of cologne. "You should stop pretending," the voice said quietly. "This place doesn't belong to you." She looked up, meeting the stare without flinching. "I'm just here to learn," she replied. A laugh followed. "We'll see how long that lasts." She walked away, heart pounding now, but her face calm. That night, she told herself she would speak to a counselor if it continued. She wanted help the right way. The next morning, she found her locker door hanging open. Inside, her books were scattered. One page had words scribbled across it in marker. Accusations, lies, ugly guesses about who she was. She closed the locker carefully. Her hands shook this time just a little. A teacher walked past and glanced inside. "Everything okay?" the teacher asked. "Yes," she replied. It wasn't entirely true, but she wasn't ready yet. Later that day, she did go to the counselor. She spoke calmly, explaining what had been happening. Dates, words, situations. The counselor listened, nodding, promising to look into it. But promises didn't stop what came next. By Friday, the tension felt like a storm waiting to break. She noticed adults watching her more closely now, not in concern, but suspicion. It was subtle. Longer looks, shorter patience. That afternoon, as she packed her bag, she heard someone say, "If something happens, don't say we didn't tell you." She paused, then kept walking. What she didn't know was that plans were already being made. Stories rehearsed. Calls ready to be placed. The line between school trouble and something far worse was about to be crossed. As she stepped off campus that day, she took a deep breath, unaware that her calm, her silence, and her strength were about to be tested in a way that would expose not just one person's cruelty, but an entire system's weakness. By the start of the third week, the pressure was no longer quiet. It followed her everywhere. In the hallways, in class, even during moments that were supposed to feel normal. She could sense it in the way people watched her, like they were waiting for something to happen. She kept her routine strong. Wake up early. Leave on time. Walk with purpose. She told herself that control was her shield. But even shields can crack when pushed hard enough. That Monday morning, she noticed two students whispering near the entrance. One of them glanced at her, then quickly looked away. As she passed, she heard the words "today" and "finally." Her steps slowed for half a second, then continued. She refused to let fear change her pace. In class, the teacher asked for volunteers to collect assignments. She stood and walked down the row. As she returned papers, someone whispered loudly, "Better count them." A few quiet laughs followed. The teacher didn't respond. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing. During lunch, she chose to sit outside, hoping the open space would bring some calm. She barely took 2 bites before footsteps approached. A shadow fell across the table. "You hear what people are saying?" the voice asked. She looked up. The person stood with arms crossed, confident, relaxed, enjoying the moment. "No," she replied. "And I'm not interested." A smile appeared. "You should be. Because when something goes missing today, guess who everyone's going to look at?" She stood slowly, tray in hand. "I haven't done anything," she said. Her voice was steady, even though her heart wasn't. "That's not how it works here," the voice replied softly. She walked away. The rest of the day felt unreal, like she was moving through fog. She kept replaying the words in her head. When something goes missing, it sounded planned, intentional. In her final class, a sudden commotion broke out. A student stood up, patting pockets, then bags. "My wallet is gone," the student said loudly. The room filled with noise. Chairs scraped. Voices overlapped. The teacher tried to calm everyone, but then a hand pointed straight at her. She was walking around earlier. All eyes turned toward her again. Her heart pounded. She stood, hands open, just like before. "I didn't take anything," she said. The teacher sighed, clearly stressed. "Let's handle this calmly," they said, though their eyes held doubt. The wallet was found minutes later near the door. Again, no apology. But this time something was different. The looks she received were colder, more convinced. After class, she overheard someone whisper, "Next time, we won't lose it." That night, she finally spoke at home. Not with anger, not with tears, just facts. Calm words, clear details. She explained the notes, the threats, the accusations. She showed the notebook she had been keeping. The adult listening did not interrupt. Their face remained still, but their eyes grew sharper with every word. "You did the right thing by writing this down," they said quietly. She nodded. "I just wanted to stop." They assured her they would handle it carefully, fairly, the right way. The next morning, she felt a strange mix of relief and fear. Relief that she wasn't alone anymore. Fear that involving adults might make things worse. By midday, she noticed something else. 2 unfamiliar officers were standing near the office. They spoke quietly with staff. She tried not to stare, but her stomach dropped. In the hallway, she heard a voice say, "They're here." Her steps slowed. In her last class of the day, a staff member appeared at the door and spoke softly to the teacher. The teacher's expression changed. "Please gather your things," the teacher said, looking directly at her. "You need to come with us." The room went silent. She stood slowly. "Why?" she asked. "There's been a report," the teacher replied. "We just need to ask you a few questions." Whispers exploded as she walked out. Phones were already being lifted. She kept her head high, even as her chest tightened. In the hallway, the officers waited. Their faces were serious. Too serious. "We've received a complaint," one of them said. "We need to take you in for questioning." "For what?" she asked. "Suspicion of theft," the officer replied. Her hands shook now, just slightly. "I didn't do anything," she said. "You can search my bag." One officer looked at the other, then shook his head. "We'll do this the proper way." The cold metal of the handcuffs surprised her more than the act itself. The click echoed loudly in the quiet hallway. Gasps filled the air. She stood frozen for a moment, then took a breath. "I want to call my parent," she said calmly. The officer hesitated, then nodded. As she was led toward the office, students lined the halls watching. Some looked shocked, others satisfied. A few looked away, ashamed. Tears burned her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She focused on breathing. She had followed every rule. She had stayed calm. She had done everything right. And still, she was being treated like she was guilty. As the office door closed behind her, she didn't know that this moment would soon turn the entire situation upside down. She only knew one thing for sure. The truth was about to be tested, and it would not stay quiet for long. The room felt smaller once the door closed. The office lights were bright, almost too bright, and every sound felt louder than it should have. Papers shuffled. A chair scraped against the floor. The handcuffs were still on her wrists, cold and heavy, reminding her that this was real. She stood quietly while the officers spoke with the school staff in low voices. Words like report, pattern, and concern floated through the air. No one looked at her directly. It felt as if she was already decided upon, already labeled. "Sit here," one officer said, guiding her to a chair. She sat, keeping her back straight. Her heart raced, but her face stayed calm. She remembered the advice she had been raised with. Stay respectful. Speak clearly. Do not argue in anger. "I asked to call my parent," she said again gently. One officer nodded. "You can make the call." She used the phone with careful hands. When the call connected, her voice stayed steady, though it took effort. "I'm at school," she said. "They brought officers. They think I stole something." There was a pause on the other end. Then a calm reply. "I'm on my way. Don't say anything else until I get there." She hung up and placed the phone back slowly. Time stretched. Minutes felt like hours. Outside the office, students passed by, peeking in through the glass. Some whispered. Others filmed quietly. The shame burned more than fear now. One officer finally spoke. "This isn't personal. We're just following procedure." She nodded. "I understand." But inside, she wondered whose procedure this really was. When the door opened again, the air in the room shifted. An adult stepped in, calm and composed, dressed simply, but carrying a quiet authority that was impossible to miss. Conversations stopped immediately. "I'm here for my child," the adult said. The officers turned. Their expressions changed. Subtle at first, then clear recognition. "Oh," one of them said softly. The school staff straightened. Someone cleared their throat. Suddenly, chairs were offered. Voices softened. The adult's eyes moved to the handcuffs. "Why are those still on?" they asked. One officer quickly stepped forward. "There was a theft report and where is the evidence?" The adult interrupted, voice calm but firm. Silence. The handcuffs were removed almost immediately. She rubbed her wrists gently, feeling warmth return to her hands. She stayed seated, letting the adult speak. "I'd like to see the report," the adult said, "and any documentation the school has." Papers were gathered in a rush. The notebook she had kept was placed on the desk as well. The adult read carefully, slowly, every word. "This shows repeated accusations without proof," they said, "and multiple witnesses to harassment." A staff member shifted uncomfortably. "We were handling it internally." "By doing nothing?" the adult asked. The room fell quiet again. One officer spoke up. "We were told there was a clear suspect." "Based on what?" the adult asked. No answer came. Outside, the hallway buzzed. News traveled fast. Students whispered as they realized something had changed. The adult finally turned to her. "Are you okay?" She nodded. "Yes," but her eyes said more. "I want an immediate review of today's actions," the adult said, standing, "including who made the call and why no investigation was done before restraints were used." The officers exchanged looks. One nodded stiffly. As they prepared to leave the office, the adult placed a hand gently on her shoulder. "You did everything right," they said quietly. Walking out of the office felt different than walking in. Heads turned. Whispers followed. Some faces looked shocked now. Others looked worried. The person who had started it all stood near a locker down the hall, eyes wide, confidence gone. For the first time, fear showed on their face. She met their gaze briefly, then looked away. Later that evening, phones buzzed across the town. Videos circulated. Questions were asked. Parents called the school. The story no longer belonged to one voice. An official review was announced. Officers were placed under temporary review. The school promised full cooperation. At home, she finally allowed herself to breathe. The weight she had been carrying for weeks began to lift, just a little. She knew this wasn't over yet, but for the first time since arriving, she felt seen, protected. The truth had stepped into the light, and it was no longer alone. The days after everything came out felt strange and quiet. Not peaceful, but careful. The school moved slower, like it was afraid of making another wrong step. Announcements were shorter. Teachers watched the halls more closely. Students whispered, but now the whispers sounded unsure. She stayed home for one day not because she was told to, but because she needed time to breathe. When she returned, the building felt different. I still followed her, but the looks had changed. Some held guilt. Some held curiosity. A few held respect. In the office, administrators asked her to sit down. This time, there were no officers waiting. No raised voices. Just serious faces and nervous hands folded on a desk. "We want to apologize," one of them said. The words sounded practiced, but the tone carried weight. "We failed to protect you." She listened quietly. She didn't interrupt. She didn't argue. She had learned that sometimes silence carried more power than words. They explained that a full review was underway. Statements were being taken. Videos and messages were being examined. The call that brought officers to the school had been traced. It had not come from concern. It had come from anger and control. Consequences followed quickly. The student who had led the accusations was removed from campus during the investigation. Others involved faced discipline as well. The story that had once painted her as suspicious began to collapse under the weight of facts. The officers who had acted without proper steps were placed under review. Procedures were questioned. Training was discussed. The town began to talk about bias in a way it never had before. The school, something else changed too. Students who had avoided her now approached quietly. One said, "I'm sorry." Another said, "That wasn't right." Some said nothing at all but offered small gestures instead. A seat saved. A shared note. A quiet smile. She accepted what felt genuine and let the rest pass. Healing, she knew, couldn't be forced. One afternoon, she stood in front of a small group of staff members, asked to share her experience. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't accuse. She spoke plainly. "I wanted to belong," she said. "I followed the rules. I stayed calm. But I was still treated like I was guilty. That shouldn't happen to anyone." The room stayed silent. The message landed. Changes were announced over the following weeks. New reporting systems, clearer rules, training sessions that were no longer optional. The school promised to do better, knowing now that promises would be watched closely. At home, life slowly returned to normal rhythms. Homework, dinner conversations, laughter that didn't feel forced. The adult who had stood up for her never bragged or reminded her of who they were. They simply asked, "How are you feeling today?" Some nights, the memories still returned. The sound of the cuffs, the stares, the moment she felt completely alone. When that happened, she wrote. She had learned that writing gave her control back. As weeks turned into months, her confidence grew in a new way. Not loud, not flashy, quiet and solid. She joined a club. She raised her hand more in class. She walked the halls without shrinking herself. The people who once tried to define her no longer had that power. Toward the end of the year, an assembly was held. The topic was fairness, responsibility, what happens when assumptions replace truth. She sat in the crowd, listening not as a symbol, but as a student who had lived it. When the speaker said, "It only takes one voice to stop something wrong," she felt a small smile form. On the last day of school, she packed her locker slowly. A student passed by and paused. "You're strong," the student said quietly. She nodded. "So are you." As she walked out of the building, sunlight hit her face. She took a deep breath. The weight she had carried for so long was finally gone. What happened to her would not be forgotten. It would be remembered in changed rules, careful choices, and a story that reminded people to look deeper before judging. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need praise. She had something better, the truth, and the strength to stand in it.